Edmund Dunn, 98,
And what year were you born?
uh, 1926.
1926. All right. So, um, can you just start out with telling us what your career was, what you've done in life, and kind of where you made your money, how you supported yourself?
Well, I was an aeronautical engineer, and I started out my first job after college. Your grandmother and I moved to New York, and I had a friend that was working for a company by the name of American Machine and Foundry, and he told me they just got a government contract and they were hiring people. And this was before the war started. And so I went over there and they hired me. And they were working on a secret government project, and we never knew what we were working on. And anytime we asked questions, they said there was no need for you to know that. So anyway, the job lasted for 3 years and we completed the project, and then the job was over. And even when we finished, we still didn't know what we were working on. And as it turned out, I think it was 3 years later, I got an invitation from the Navy to go on a cruise on a nuclear submarine. And I went, and while I was on there, I had security clearance from the other job. And I walked around, I could go anywhere on the sub that I wanted to, and everything looked familiar to me. So I went home and I did some research, and then I found out that the project that we had been working on for 3 years was the first nuclear submarine, the USS Nautilus. So that was pretty interesting. And then went to work, when that job ended, I went to work for Fairchild Aircraft. And while I was there, the space program started up. And I thought I'd like to get interested in working on that. So I left there and I decided to start my own company with the intention of providing components to the space program. And I did. And I ended up working on the space program for over 30 years. And I was involved in putting components on every space shot and every satellite up there. So that's pretty much my career. I retired when the last thing I worked on was the space shuttle. This, yeah, the space shuttle. And that's when I retired.
What year was that when you retired?
Oh boy, it must have been 1982 or so.
1982. Very nice. And what was, you kind of briefly touched on it, but what was like one of your biggest milestones personally in your career?
The biggest what?
Milestone that you reached? What was like one of your most proudest moments that you reached throughout your career?
I probably had more than one. I'm pretty fortunate. Uh, I don't know, my flying career was big in my life, and I got involved in 1953. There were a group of guys formed an organization that they called the Experimental Aircraft Association. And I was one of the original group that formed that. And it grew to be worldwide. And every year they have a convention in Wisconsin that's the biggest aircraft convention in the world. And in 1998, they presented me with an award. There were 30,000 people there. That was a big deal. And then maybe 8 years ago, I was inducted into the Aviation Hall of Fame. And then the other thing that I did that very few people have had the opportunity to do, they were building, I was at Grumman Aircraft, I was there on a business deal, and they built the unit that was called the Lunar Expeditionary Module, and it was the vehicle that was going to land on the moon. And this was before, a couple months before it was supposed to happen. And we were walking through there, and a guy I was walking with said to me, "How would you like to see the LEM, lunar?" I said, "I'd love to see it." So he took me in, they had a room where it was sitting there, and the floor was like the floor of the moon, moonscape. And I was just awed by the thing. And he said, "How'd you like to fly it?" And I said, "Are you kidding me?" And he said, "No." So I got in it and made a simulated flight to space, to outer space. And I'm probably one of 3 people that got to do that. So that was a big accomplishment.
That's amazing.
And then a couple months later, it went to the moon.
Wow. That's amazing. That's something that's very like only that you could do, that you've done.
Yeah,
Because
that's it. I know of only 3 people that got to do it outside the guys that actually went to the moon.
that's amazing. So speaking of like milestones, a lot of people are super career driven, and some people are more focused on just the monetary value of careers. So when you get asked a question like what is your biggest milestone in your career, would you say that your career's milestone is the same as personal milestones in your own life? Do you have any personal milestones that you can think of that don't have anything to do with your career?
I don't know. I was pretty goal oriented, and I knew when I finished college what I wanted to do, and I set goals for myself, and I met most of my goals. I can think I've accomplished everything I wanted to do. There's only one thing in my life that I wanted to do that I never did, and that was learn to play the piano. I wish I had done that, but I didn't. But when I think back on it, talking about this, I've had the opportunity to go under the ocean in a submarine, and I had the opportunity to go take a simulated space flight. So I've gone from the depths of the ocean to the heights of the stratosphere. Again, how many people can say that?
Yeah, and where's the piano fit in that? It doesn't.
It doesn't.
No.
I just, I guess I'm artistic in a way, and I just have the feeling, I enjoy music, and particularly I envy the people that can sit down at a piano and just, go. But I never did it.
You recently, not recently, you've been doing it for a while, but you've taken up the talent of painting. And I know you've always been very artistic your whole life, just from, you telling me stories and everything of when I would grow up and
Yeah.
everything. But is that something completely different from wanting to learn the piano? Is painting?
I don't think so. I mean, artistic, you seem to have the same kind of drive to do one or the other.
Right.
I think they're both similar in many respects.
So when, you say that the piano is like the only thing that you regret not learning, do you still feel like you could do that?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And if we brought in a piano right now, would you learn how to play it?
I'll tell you a story about that. I hadn't
Yeah.
thought about it till just now. But when I was in college, I lived in a sorority house. I think I've told you about that.
Yeah.
And they had a baby grand piano in the living room. And I dated one of the girls there, and she was a music major. And she used to play the piano. And I said, boy, I wish I could play it. And she had one piece, Claire de Lune was the name of it. It was a very old piece. And she taught me to play that all the way through, just by rote. And I used to sit at that piano in the living room and play that thing. And the girls used to say to me, play something else. I can't. That's it.
That's hilarious.
And I could play that thing like nobody's business. But that was it.
That's amazing. What was the tune called?
Claire de Lune.
Claire de
And
Lune.
I never forgot it.
So now, you have told me that story before of you working in a sorority house, living in the sorority house, correct? So that's where you met Grandma, right?
Yeah.
In the sorority house.
She came, they had what they call pledge night, you know, and they have the girls come, new students, and they tour the different sorority houses to see if they want to pledge one of them. And she came in, and that's how I first met her.
That's amazing. Do you remember any specifics from the first time that you met Grandma?
I probably told you this story. It's a little wild, but I was at a basketball game. I never dated her or anything up to this point. And I was on my way home from the basketball game, and I stopped at a drugstore, Warner's drugstore. And I went in there, and they were just getting ready to close. I picked up something, I don't remember what it was. And she was there, and she was getting off work. And I said, can I give you a ride home? She only lived about 2 blocks from there. But, so I gave her a ride home, and we stopped in front of the house. It was 10 o'clock at night. And we were there, I don't think, for 10 minutes, just talking. First time I'd ever spent any time with her. And her father came rushing out of the house, opened the car door. He said, what's going on here? And she said, he just gave me a ride home. And she was so flustered, she got out of the car and ran in the house. And, you know, I didn't know what to say, and I just drove off. I didn't say anything to her father. So I saw her a couple days later at school, and she said, I told my father what was going on. She said, and he wants you to come to dinner Sunday afternoon. She lived in town there. She said, he wants me to come there for Sunday dinner. He wants to apologize. I said, oh boy, I don't really want to go through this. So I did go. And there's another part of this story that I'm not going to get into. But anyway, we sat there and chatted, and he apologized. And from that point on, we started dating.
So it was a rough start at first with the father, but after that.
Well, what happened, I was working part-time in a furniture store. And I used to go on a truck with another guy, and we'd deliver furniture, appliances, whatever. And when we did it, I'd always see an ice truck, because then the war had just ended then. And during the war, they didn't build refrigerators or anything. They used all the material for war. And people were still using ice. They had ice boxes. And we'd see an ice truck and a guy delivering ice to people. And almost every other house, he was delivering ice. And I went back to the store, and I said to the guy who owned it, Ralph Stevens was his name, and I said, you know, when we deliver furniture, I see all these people still using ice. They'd be customers for refrigerators. He says, tell me about it. So I said, what would you think of this? If we put a refrigerator on the truck, we go to somebody that I know is using ice, tell them we'll put the refrigerator in their home, let them use it for a week, no questions asked, we'll come back. If they want to keep it, we'll make it easy for them to buy it. Otherwise, we'll take it back. So we did. We put one on the truck. The house we brought it to came back a week later. They wouldn't give it back. They wanted to buy it. I said, this is great. Let's keep doing it. We did that every week. Got to the point we put 2 of them on the truck. Got rid of them. Finally, Ralph Stevens, it was Frigidaire refrigerators that we sold. They were made by General Motors. He called General Motors and he ordered a freight car full of refrigerators. Now, we were in a town of 25,000 people. We were selling more refrigerators than anybody in the country. So General Motors sent a guy down to visit us. He said, what are you doing with these refrigerators? And we told him. Well, anyway, getting back to when Grandma invited me and I sat with her father at dinner. We finished dinner. She and the mother went out to the kitchen, were doing the dishes, and I was sitting there with her father trying to make conversation, you know. He's asking me questions. And finally I said to him, and what is it that you do, Mr. Boyd? And he said, I'm the manager of the ice plant in town. And some guy's following up my trucks and delivering refrigerators and stealing all my customers. And I wanted to crawl under the table. But I never said anything until the day he died. He never knew that that was me.
That is crazy.
So that's the way I got off with her.
Wow, that is
So-
very bad luck on his end.
Yeah, that was kind of wild.
Do you believe in luck? Do you believe
No.
in luck or
I think you make your own luck. I think we use that word indiscriminately. Like, if somebody works hard, is successful, they get a nice home, a family and everything, you say, boy, he's lucky. He's not lucky, it's the result of good work, hard work. Same thing if somebody doesn't live right and everything else, then you say, well, it's bad luck. It isn't luck at all.
right?
Luck is the result of what you do, your effort. So I don't really believe in luck.
I think that stands true to your life because it seems like you've worked hard your entire life. You've set goals for yourself, and you know, in a way, like you've promised yourself that you'd complete these goals that you've made throughout life, and you have. And is there a promise that you made to somebody or to yourself that still stands true to today?
No, the only connection I'd make with that is I've always trusted people. And there were 3 people that betrayed my trust. 2 of them cost me a lot of money. And I still trust people, in spite of the fact that 3 of them did me wrong. That's the only promise, if you will, that I can think of.
Is there any morals that you've stood by over the course of your life?
Well, I think you have to treat other people with respect, and you get that in return. You don't treat them with respect, and you don't get respect back.
And that's something that you've carried with you your entire life.
Yeah, I think if you do right, it comes back to you.
We talked about your morals and kind of where life has brought you to this point, what you've accomplished and everything. Um, One question that I wanted to ask, because this project is just about like biographies. And I think a huge part of life is relationships and love and your family. I think that's a huge part of life, and I think that's a big part to people's biographies. You were so loved from so many people. You have an amazing family, me included. But I wanted to ask, what was your greatest love, and what did they mean to you?
Well, of course, your grandmother. That's a kind of tough.
Yeah, I know.
But she was the most unselfish person I've ever known in my life. And I really miss her.
We all do. She was an amazing woman. She really was.
But she was the only one.
She did so much for everybody.
She always put everybody else before herself.
She really was an amazing woman. She obviously meant a lot to all of us, and she still does to this day. Do you have any memories, like any? You've told me before that you guys, used to go down to New York and go to see shows. Was there any other, like, one of the happiest memories that you've had?
Well, when I was working in New York on that classified project, she used to come over and meet me, and we'd have dinner, and we'd go around to the different shows, theaters, and I'd ask them if they had any cancellations, and they always did, and we'd get tickets real cheap. So we used to see a lot of Broadway shows that way. We saw a lot of television shows.
She raised a lot of her grandkids, like me, and I feel like she very much was always there for her grandkids, and I
She
think
loved the kids.
she did. I think, like, just from her, you are a protective figure to her. I think when she was, with us still. Um, as far as, your relationship was with grandma, what were some other, like, memories that you've had with her, as far as, um, raising your children and living in Connecticut and everything like that?
Well, I remember we built our first house on Long Island, and we lived there for I can't remember how many years. And then I had an opportunity to work in Connecticut, and we moved there, and I bought a house there. House was already built, and she loved that house. She loved it. And when I retired, I told her I'd like to move to Florida. And she didn't want to leave that house. And yet she did, because she did it for me. Because I knew if I stayed in Connecticut, I would just dry up. Because the weather and everything. And I could live down here, I could fly, I could play golf and everything else. So she gave up the house and came here, but her heart was always back there, I feel. In fact, any time we went back there, a few times that we did, she wouldn't even go near the house. She didn't want to see it.
Do you remember anything from one of your first houses together? What were some specifics of the house?
It was a small house. It was, 2 bedrooms. I think the mortgage payment was something like $60 a month or something. I don't know. It was built from scratch. And I worked nearby. That's when I was with Fairchild. But it was a good first house.
Is that around the same time that you started your business? Or
No, I
was that
started
before?
my business when we were in Connecticut.
Okay. Now, do you remember much about your childhood home? The home that you grew up in?
Not a whole lot. I remember more about my teenage years than I did earlier. I have some memory of it, but I remember that I used to, in the summer, I'd spend a lot of time with my grandmother. She lived in Brooklyn. And I used to stay with her because there was a swimming pool nearby that was built by the county. And they let the kids in there free from morning till noon every day. So I stayed there so I could go swimming at the pool every day. So I did that a lot with her in the summer.
How old were you around this time?
Oh, maybe 10, 12, in that area.
Was that, speaking of like childhood, was that one of your happiest childhood memories?
Yeah, the thing about, I remember this so vividly,
Yeah.
and this shows you how different things were years ago. In the summer there, the people all used to sit out on what they call the stoop, the steps to the house, or they'd have benches by the curb, and every evening everybody'd sit out there. And the neighborhood was very mixed, Italian and Polish, but mostly Italian where she lived. And the people used to sit out there in the evening and they'd sing opera. And I remember that so vividly.
And this was where you went swimming, like near where you
Yeah.
went swimming. So it wouldn't be uncommon for you to be swimming in the pool and hearing some Bocelli.
Well, you couldn't hear it in the pool, but in the evening they did it.
That's interesting. That's amazing. That's a great memory. Um, is there any other childhood memory that's like stayed with you that you can think of? Not even just childhood, maybe a teenage year, that a story that you learned something or.
Well, I remember when I was living with my grandmother, they had a thing called the soapbox derby. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was a big thing. It was national. And they had kids build these cars, you know, four wheels, just propelled on an incline. And what they did, they had these races in different areas. They'd pick a street that's got a steep incline, and they had a thing built, a platform, where they had a board like this, and they put three cars behind the board, then they dropped the board, and you'd go down the hill and race. And there was a grocery store nearby where my grandmother lived, and there was a guy who was a little older than I was, quite a bit older. And his father owned the grocery store. And I told him I'd like to build a race car for the soapbox derby. And he helped me build it. And we took it and we raced it. And I won. There's a trophy in there. I still have. It's about that big. It says soapbox derby.
And how old were you?
I don't know, maybe 10, 11. I can't remember.
I'd like to see that trophy. That's amazing. So it kind of seems like you've always had sort of a thrill for going fast or for doing stuff like that.
Yeah, and for building things. I love to build things.
Right. Now, so do you think that was a milestone that led you into wanting to become a pilot or wanting to join the Air Force?
I knew that I wanted to fly from the time I was in grade school. And in fact, I remember I had a science teacher, Mr. Frank. And I don't remember what grade I was in, but anyway, I told him one day, I said, I want to fly, you know. And he sat and he talked to me about it. And he said, let's write a letter to the Navy Department. Because I was interested in flying with the Navy. I'd seen movies, you know, about Pensacola and where they train the Navy pilots. He sat down with me and wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy. And I got a nice letter back with a bunch of pamphlets and everything. And that stuck with me. And in fact, when the war came, and before I enlisted, I was in high school, I was a high school senior. And you had to take a test to get Navy pilot training or Army pilot. And I took both tests because I wanted to cover, you know, if I failed one, I wanted to get, I really wanted to go into the Navy. And they let me graduate. I enlisted, they let me graduate. And I got a letter one day from the Army Air Corps telling me to report for a physical in New York City. And I went, I still thought, well, I'll wait, I'll hear from the Navy, I'll do this, but hopefully I'll hear from the Navy. So I was in there all day going through this physical. We went through verbal tests and everything. And then at the end of the day, they brought us into a room and they said, raise your right hand. And I said, holy crap, I'm gonna be in the Army Air Corps. And I got home and there was a letter from the Navy asking me to report for a physical. And I was crushed because I was already in the Army. And that's how it happened.
Wow. So you were in the, I didn't know that. So you were in the Army wanting to join the Navy.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Do you?
I missed it by one day. But, you know, it's fate. I don't know where I would have ended up if I went in the Navy.
Yeah, do you still wish that you had joined the Navy, or do you kind of feel that?
I don't know, wishing doesn't make it so, you know, but it is what it is.
How did you feel while you were serving in the Air Force? Like, what was your emotions? What was your mindset during your time in serving?
Well, you know, during the war, what they did, they had movies and everything that glamorized it, you know. You're going to be a pilot, you're going to be a hero, you know, all the women are going to be running after you, all that crap. And after I was in there, it suddenly occurred to me I had lost complete control of my life. They tell you when to go to bed, when to get up, when to eat, where you're going, when you're going to go there, how long you're going to be there. And that bothered me a lot. But then when I started flying, it got a little better. But then when we got to combat, and I wasn't 19 years old yet, and I remembered we'd walk out to that airplane, and before I'd get in it every day, and I knew everybody else was going through the same thing, and I'd say to myself, I wonder if this is the day that I'm going to die. And when you're 19 years old or 18 years old, that's pretty tough. So that's the way I thought. But once you got in the airplane and started, it was all business. You forgot it, you know?
So, in the moments that you weren't flying, were you just constantly dealing with that mental struggle of like, I may not come back alive?
It was always in the back of your mind, you know, because that's why you were there. But it was kind of tough. It's a mindset. The thing is, kids fight wars. And the reason they do is because they know you're going to do what they tell you to do. If I was 25 years old and they told me to do something, I'd say, go to hell. You know, when you're a kid, you don't do that. They put the fear of life in you. But, you know, it was what it was.
Was there a specific moment during the war that had a significant impact on you?
Very much so. I remember we were coming back from a mission. We still had about 6 hours to go before we were going to get back to our home base. And the airplane had been badly damaged. The right wing was damaged. And it was at night. We couldn't see how bad the damage was. We were in the middle of a severe thunderstorm. And the turbulence was severe. The airplane was getting bounced around something terrible. And we worried with the damage, you know, what was going to happen. But anyway, I was real tired, and I went back and had a cup of coffee. We had like a hot plate thing back there, but you saw the back of the airplane.
Yeah.
I walked back there and had coffee, and then I laid down on the floor. I was going to lie there just to rest for a few minutes, and I took my parachute and put it under my head for a pillow. And I must have fallen asleep. I didn't intend to, but I wasn't asleep too long. And the waist gunner, Bill Anderson, woke me up and he said, "Hey, get up." He said, "Put your parachute on. The airplane's breaking up. We're going to have to bail out." And I quickly woke up, put my parachute on, and walked back. They were all standing by the back door. It hadn't opened yet. They were waiting for me to get there because the minute they opened the door, the airplane was pressurized inside When we opened the door, we would have pushed right out. So when I got back there, I finally woke up and came to my senses. And I said, wait a minute. I said, stop and think what we're about to do here. I said, we're at 30,000 feet. We're in the middle of a violent storm. We're going to be sucked out. You don't know if the parachute's going to open in this weather. Let's assume that it does. You get back down to the ocean, it's going to be rough because of the storm. You'll get sucked under by that parachute when you hit the water before you can get it unhooked. Assuming you survive that, then you're going to be in the water. It's at night. You don't know how long you're going to be in the water, or if you're lucky enough for a Navy patrol boat to pick you up. So I said, the airplane's badly damaged, but I said, while I'm talking here, it's still in the air. It's not falling out of the sky. So I'm going to suggest that you all go back and we ride it out. And they did. And that moment is ingrained in my mind like it happened yesterday. I have never forgotten that. And everybody was calm. We thought we were all going to die. Everybody was calm. Nobody was excited. They calmly went back. And then morning came. After a few hours, the sun came up. We could see the right wing was badly damaged. And I said, well, the worst thing that can happen is we'll ditch it in the ocean. I said, but our chances of surviving that are better than if you bailed out in a parachute. So they agreed. They agreed to stay with the airplane. So we finally made it back, and I didn't have good control of the airplane because of the damage. And everything looked like it was set up okay. Making the approach to the airport, we got close to the ground, and this engine quit. And suddenly the airplane did that. We were too close to the ground to correct it. And the next thing I knew, everything went quiet. And it was quiet for a long time. And the next thing I knew, I woke up and I was in bed. And I heard some voices. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I turned to look, and I couldn't see. I put my hand up to my face, and my eyes were bandaged. And then there was a woman's voice standing next to the bed. And she said something to me. I don't even remember what it was. And I said, where am I? She said, you're in a military hospital in Clovis, New Mexico. And I said, what am I doing here? How did I get here? She said, they flew in last night. And she said, why don't you just rest? She said, the doctor will be in here shortly and he'll talk to you. So then the doctor did come in later. And he said, look, you're going to be here with us for a while. He said, we'll take good care of you. He said, just rest. He said, and I'll be back. And then I remember, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 days later, the nurse came back in. And I said, what happened to the rest of my crew? Where are they? And she said, you're the only one that they flew in. And I said, well, I want to know what happened to them. So she said, I'll get a pad and a pencil and I'll be back. She said, give me all the information. I'll see what I can find out. And she came back and said, okay. And she sat there, and I'm trying to pull this information out, give her the names of the crew, and nothing came. And I said, I can't remember. And she said, do you remember your group? And I said, no. So she didn't want to upset me. She says, look, don't worry about it. She said, I'll put the pad here and the pencil. And she said, maybe in a day or two you'll remember. Well, it never came back. And I asked the doctor about it. He says, well, you've had a traumatic experience. He said, it may take a while. He said, but it'll probably come back. So I was in the hospital for a month, and the war ended while I was in there. I still didn't know what happened to the crew. Didn't know anything. And I felt the guilt because I talked them into staying with the airplane. And finally, the doctor came in and he said, look, he said, I'm going to send you home to recuperate. He said, I want you to stay home for 2 months and then report to Fort Dix, New Jersey to be discharged. So I said, okay. So, one thing, when I was trying to tell a nurse about my crew and everything, I said, go to my Foot Locker, all my private information's in there, and that'll be in there. She said, we didn't get any Foot Locker. She said, all you had was the clothes on your back, and they cut that off when I got there. So anyway, when they told me they were sending me home, they gave me a uniform, they paid me. I didn't have a billfold because that was in my Foot Locker. I had a plastic bag with a toothbrush, a comb, and toothpaste. That's all I had. They gave me money. They never should have sent me home that way. But anyway, I was so glad to get out. I went to the bus station and I bought a ticket to New York. And that bus trip, I think, took 2 days or 3 days, I don't remember. But it was a real ordeal after being in a hospital for a month, and I was cooped up in this bus. And then I started to think, when I get to New York, am I going to remember how to get home? And somehow I did. I hadn't been home in a year. My mother didn't know I was coming because while I was in the hospital, I didn't want her to know it. I didn't want her to worry about it. And I didn't write. And I told the nurse I was concerned about it. And she said, you want me to write a letter for you? Because I couldn't with my eyes bandaged. And I said, no, that would upset my mother more. So she got hold of the Red Cross, and they came in and they let me make a record, and I sent that home, so that helped. But anyway, getting back to getting home, I hadn't been there in a year, and I don't have a single memory of walking in the house after not being home in a year. I don't remember anything about it. So, I don't know, it's strange. But anyway, I went to Fort Dix, and they gave me my discharge. And when I left, they said, go to the VA and pick up your medals. Well, I never did. That was a big mistake, but that's another story. So anyway, I was glad to get discharged and get on with my life. Am I talking too long here?
No, not at all.
And so I enrolled in college and got on with my life. And still I had this guilt of not knowing what happened to everybody on the crew. And 2 years later, I had a neighbor, Helen Case, and we were real close. We went to school together, high school. We walked together every morning, came home together every evening for 4 years. And every Sunday afternoon, we went to the beach, Jones Beach on Long Island. There were thousands of people there on a Sunday afternoon. But anyway, this Sunday afternoon, we were there. And while we were there, my mother got a phone call. And it was from a guy, and he said, he said, jeez.
I know it's tough.
He said, oh gosh, I hate myself when I do this.
Oh no, Grandpa, it's completely understandable.
He said his name was Bill Anderson. And he said he was on my crew during the war. And he said he wanted to know if I was all right. My mother said I was. And he said I have to see him. So he didn't have a car. She told him how to get to the house. He came there. It was early Sunday afternoon. And he told her that all he knew was that I was from New York. That's the only information he had. And he said he was going to find me one way or another. And he took the phone directory. And he said he was going to call every Dunn in the phone directory till he found me. And the third call he made would happen to be my mother. And she told him I was at the beach. And she said I usually get home between 5:30 and 6, or 5 o'clock and 6. So she said, just relax and he'll be here. He said, no, I have to see him. He said, I'll go to the beach and find him. She said, you can't find him at the beach. There's thousands of people there. And he said, I'll find him. So he took the train out to Jones Beach, got off at the Jones Beach station. It was a short walk to the boardwalk. And about that time, I said to Helen, let's go up to the boardwalk and get something to drink. And she said, okay. We walked up there to the boardwalk. I turned left. Maybe I took a half a dozen steps, and we came face to face. And the first thing he said to me was everybody on the crew was safe. And boy, what a weight that was off of my shoulders. Oh, geez. And he knew I wanted to hear that. So we spent the rest of the day together and catching up, and he left. And I saw him a few years later. He came back to see me again. He had his whole family. Had 2 boys and a girl. They were teenagers then. And those kids had heard about Coney Island. I don't know if you ever heard about it. Well, they wanted to go there. So I took them there. We spent the day there. They went on all the rides and everything. And they had a new ride there called a parachute jump. It was a big tower. there were parachutes all around the bottom, and they were opened out, and a cable pulled them up to the top of the tower, and then release them, and they'd float down to the ground. Well, the kids wanted to go on it. That was okay. But they wanted, we called him Andy, we never called him Bill. Wanted Andy and I to go on it. We both refused. And the kids couldn't understand that. But anyway, they left after that. And that was the last time I saw him. But I'm so grateful to him that he searched me out and found me. And you talk about faith and determination, boy. So that's my story there.
Must have been absolutely life changing and such a huge weight off your shoulders.
Oh boy, you can't imagine. Because I talked him into staying with the airplane.
And how did you talked about how he reached out to you and found you. How did you stay in contact with your family back home during the war?
Just letters. We didn't get letters like every week, but that's all you could do, just write letters.
So I think to end on a good note, what's some type of advice or any message that you want to give to people my age or people Jordan's age or even the younger grandkids that you have now? What's some?
Oh boy. I don't, it's difficult because the world has changed so much. And not for the better, unfortunately. But I think it's important to have goals, to know where you want to be and know how you're going to get there, instead of just drifting aimlessly, which a lot of people do. I remember my father telling me something at one point in my life. Like talking about flying or something. I can't remember what the subject was. I said, but everybody's doing that. There's a lot of people there. He said, it doesn't matter what you do in life, no matter how many people are there involved. Just be the best at what you do. And he said, you'll never have a problem. And I think that's a goal to try and attain. Be the best at what you do.
Whether that be, what if you aren't the best at what you do, and you.
Well, that's an interesting point because not everybody has the same ability. And this has always been a sore point with me. In school, you have this grading system, which I realize you have to have. But unfortunately, there are kids that have more ability than other kids, especially in different subjects. And yet, the kid that doesn't have the ability may work as hard as a kid that does have ability. But yet, the end result isn't as good as the other kid. Yet he or she gets a bad grade. And that doesn't seem right. And not only that, I think you do harm to somebody like that thinking, well, I'm not as good as they are. And if I were teaching school, I wouldn't grade that way.
So if you were to, to kind of, touch on the saying be the best at what you do, would you say it's more of a strive to be the best you can be? Or is it,
Let's put it this way, be the best you can be with the ability that you have. Like they talk about college now, they're saying that college isn't for everybody, and that's true. But you can be a truck driver and be a good truck driver. You can be a plumber, be a good plumber. That way you'll be happy as well.
right? Well, thank you very much, Grandpa. I think
I'm sorry I got emotional about it, but
that's, a true to life scenario. I think that's
But
something that people kind of shy away from nowadays. So I think it's definitely something that,
I normally don't get emotional when I talk about the war because it's been so long it doesn't bother me anymore, but and I didn't think that it did bother me anymore, but I guess it still does in some ways.
but it's a huge part of your life. It's been a huge part of your life, and it shaped you. I feel like that's something that will stick with you.
Well, it leaves a scar on you, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I don't care if you've been in a war, you never forget the sense of guilt that you survived and somebody else died.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for it. How come him and not me?
Would you say that a lot of people struggle with that? A lot of people are.
I don't see how you cannot struggle with it. You have to. Because it is buried in there. You can't get rid of it.
And do you believe that that's some sort of religious theme? Do you think there is a reason for it, or do you think that it's something that's
Well, it's sure not luck. Good luck or bad luck. It's something else. I mean, people are always asking me what's the secret to the fact that I lived this long. And I have at times said, well, I've been lucky. It's not that at all. I thought I wasn't going to live to be 19, and yet I did. So all these years are a bonus, and it's not because I did anything. There's something else. I mean, by the grace of God, I'm here, and that's it, period. No ifs, ands, or buts.
it's beautiful?
So do you think I can get a job in the movies?